This is How About That Podcast, a show dedicated to all things Dallas Cowboys. With both objective and subjective perspectives, How About That Podcast is your place to hear about America's team. Now, here's Joseph Hoyt and Danny Morales.
All right, today I wanted to start off the pod with a story from yesterday. We're recording Monday, June 17th. So this was Sunday. My fiance and I are big musical / play people. We when we're in New York, it's like, okay, how many plays can we go to? How many musicals can we go to? We love it. So the Tonys were last night, which is the Oscars of, the musicals and the plays and basically the theater. And I'm watching it and I love it. The live stuff is awesome. Jonathan Groff won for Best Actor in a Musical, which is fantastic. One of my goals in life, Joey, is to be like the king from Hamilton in a neighborhood play. Obviously not Broadway, but I sing that song all the time. But anyways, there was basically it's like Best Supporting Actress in a Musical. It's a different category name, but it was won by this woman named Keisha Lewis, who won it for her performance in a musical called Hell's Kitchen, which I believe. No, The Outsiders won musical. Anyways, I'm rambling a little bit, but Keisha Lewis has, right when she won, one thing I noticed was all the other nominees were clapping up like crazy. They were thrilled. They were going nuts. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was unfamiliar with her in the musical. So Keisha Lewis comes up on stage. She's a little bit older. And basically she had this whole speech and I thought it was really cool. She said, hey, it was her first time winning a Tony. And she said, I'll read the quote for you. 40 years ago yesterday, I walked into the Imperial Theater to begin my Broadway career at 18 years old. I've had so many amazing experiences and some heartbreaking ones too. I took a short break from show business and raised a son as a single parent while trying to build a career. This moment is the one I dreamed of for most of these 40 years. So I said, everyone who can hear my voice, don't give up. Basically, her whole point was in 40 years, she'd always dreamed of winning a Tony. It took 40 years. She even mentioned previously in the speech that there were moments that she wanted to give up. She didn't. She persevered. And after 40 years, she finally won a Tony. And I just love that message because I think whether it's podcasting, whether it's reporting, whether it's on Broadway, whether it's, trying to be the best accountant there is, there are moments where you want to give up. And I think you got to keep persevering and pushing through and listening to your gut. And that's what Keisha Lewis did. So today on June 17th, I salute Keisha Lewis.
You saying that, the first thing that comes to my brain, when are podcasts going to be big enough where it gets its own real award show? You know what I mean? I feel there's plenty of little awards that they have, but there's not an Oscars, a Tonys, a Grammys. They don't have one of those, but podcasts are becoming so prominent that I feel like that's something that's not out of reach in the future.
My one pushback to that is podcasts to me, because it's so conversational / narrative. And obviously then you maybe falls into an Emmys type kind of show. But I also think that we don't do really big award shows for Pulitzers, for example, for storytelling like that. So part of me thinks that maybe it just sticks to, hey, it's definitely, there's awards for it. I forget what the awards are for podcasts. There's awards for them, but I don't know if it would ever get to the high quality of the Tonys. And to be honest with you, this was my first time ever watching the Tonys. I don't watch the Oscars every year. I'll see clips. I don't watch the Grammys. And I think the Tonys is a little bit in terms of ranking the viewership on those is probably a little bit lower, but I've really gotten into musicals and I think, so that's why I tuned in and it was fantastic. So if you want to just my goal for everyone out there is to invoke the spirit of Keisha Lewis and to never give up, keep persevering, because, everyone's got dreams, so go for it. So I wanted to be a little bit more, I feel like without Danny here, we could be a little bit more emotional. Danny is just a cold-hearted, he's the Grinch. So I've
never seen him smile a day in his life.
He only smiles when he's making fun of you, to be honest.
Probably.
So, well, everyone, thanks for tuning in. We have another Dallas Cowboys pod for you. Before we dive in, want to tell you guys to make sure you follow Lone Star Live. We have daily Cowboys coverage. Joey and I are working hard to give you stories. Wrote a fun feature on Cooper Beebe last week, which got some good reviews and really insightful into why he has a chance to compete in the starting center competition. I want you guys also to consider signing up for our subtext, which is this campaign we're doing where basically you can text with me and I can text with you. And one thing I do is I'll send out features, I'll send out thoughts right to your phone about the Cowboys. You can text with me. We can go back and forth. I've had some nice conversations there. Soon we're going to have mailbag episodes here. And what we'll do is we'll get those mailbag questions through the campaign. So if you want to sign up for that, you can find that information on Lone Star Live, or you can text Cowboys to 512-846-6377. That's 512-846-6377. I promise I will not blow up your phone too much, but it's a fun way to kind of be involved and to really get a feel for the Cowboys right to your phone. So, Joey, off pod, we were talking a little bit about this trial in Massachusetts that I hadn't even heard about, which is kind of a testament to sometimes there's so much information out there that things get lost. But you're based in Massachusetts currently. Tell us a little bit more, because I was you explaining it blew my mind, and I don't know if everyone else knows about it. So can you just kind of your very basic knowledge and gist of this? It kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize it is a very basic knowledge. There's some people who watch this case and know this a lot better than I do. I've gotten most of my information from reading like one or two things, and mostly just word of mouth, talking with everyone, because a lot of my friends and family are talking about it right now, just because it's like a 30-minute drive. It's Canton, Mass, which is so close to my hometown. But what's going on is Karen Reed, I think it was at some point during the winter, hit this guy who I'm pretty sure was a police officer with his car. And people think that Karen Reed, she's the one on trial right now for allegedly murdering this man. But what they're uncovering, and what seems to be the consensus right now, is Karen Reed, yeah, she might have hit this man with her car by accident or whatever may have happened, but she didn't kill him. So when it comes to who's killing him, it really doesn't seem like they're going to get to a consensus on that. I think she's going to get off on being not guilty of murder, but the kicker is that I think this guy's a cop, and what makes it interesting is that there's these other group of cops that allegedly are the ones that may have killed this guy. Which
that's what her defense is arguing, right? It's something like that, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's all this evidence where like they think they took this guy into some basement and just like beat him to a pulp, basically, and then there's also this whole other side story with a dog, where like a dog like attacked him and bit him, and that didn't help either, because they just got rid of this dog. They sold this dog with no record of anything. That basement floor that he allegedly got like beaten up on, they like jackhammered it all away. So the floor is just like not there anymore. So they kind of took that evidence out. And there's just other little things of evidence that they just like cleared out. And there's also like a text that they saw with the police officer that like, or allegedly was doing these things, being like, I think we have enough. They didn't say anything about what they did, but they said like, I think we have enough to pin this on Karen Reed.
So long story short, it's pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of accusations going around about this poor guy's death. And long story short, Joey was telling me about this, and I hadn't even heard of it yet. So pretty crazy stuff. I promise there's a Cowboy segue coming to this, but I wanted to tell this story too, because I used to work in Portland, Oregon for a TV station there. So the one thing I found with covering the Cowboys and covering local news is that there's just stories all the time. And things are always happening. And it's crazy. I'll never forget this story. When I was working for Coin TV, and I was working on the digital side, but I'll never forget. So we get into the office, I think it was a Sunday morning, and we start hearing on the scanner some activity, and then eventually we get a press release from the Portland police saying like, hey, this beloved culinary chef at this culinary school was found dead this morning, by his students. They walk in for their every weekend culinary class, and they find their teacher, their beloved teacher, dead on the ground, shot in the back, dead. Crazy, right? The heartbreaking. So later that night, there's this memorial. They have There's just tears. Everyone's talking about Daniel Brophy. He was incredible. Yeah, he was tough, but we loved him. Incredible. So your mind races like, okay, who would have basically assassinated this guy, right? Could it have been a break-in? But why would you break in early morning to a culinary school? Could it have been a homeless person? Which, in Portland, there's a lot of homeless people, and sometimes that kind of happens. So everyone was wondering, okay, who could have done it? And I forget how long it took, but eventually, and being on the digital side, one thing it means is you're on the computer constantly. So you're pretty much usually the first people to like get emails from like police with press releases, right? It pops up, you're like, oh, and you'll like announce it. And I'll never forget, I'm the first one to see it, and we're in the newsroom, and it says like subject lines like arrest made in chef's murder. And I'm like, oh, and I announce like, hey everyone, there's been an arrest in the Brophy case, and I like skim through it really quick, and I go like, holy, it was his wife. And so they arrested. And by the way, Daniel Brophy's an older dude. Nancy Brophy, her name, also an older woman, right? So she has this most like elderly woman look to her, right? Like the white hair, little curly, short. Anyways, she was so emotional at the memorial. Everyone was like, oh my God, how did she did this? We come to, this is not even the kicker though. We come to find out doing research on Nancy Brophy that Nancy Brophy in her free time was an author, but more of like a blogger, but like she would write books that she kind of put online. And one of the novels she wrote was How to Murder Your Husband and Get Away with It. So the headline, Joey, was woman who wrote How to Murder Her Husband accused of murdering her husband.
I've heard of that before. Now that I've heard of that last part before. That is just, ugh. I mean,
She was found guilty. Shocking. She was found guilty. But it was crazy. So she's like an older woman, right? And like one of the things they found is that like she had ordered like one of those ghost guns, like the ones where it's like you can like manufacture. It's like it comes with like different items and you can manufacture it yourself. And basically the idea is to like not have ballistic evidence, I think, from it. Anyways, crazy stuff. So you talking about local news made me think of this story, and I'll just never forget the like, holy
yeah,
yelling it in the newsroom because it blew my mind.
You got to be an interesting type of person to write that sort of book. So honestly, not the most shocking thing in the world, but obviously still super just crazy.
Yeah, dude. They made a Lifetime movie about it. It was insane. There's some other crazy local news stories. Maybe we'll talk about them later, but yeah, that blew my mind. But the reason we brought up Karen Reed, Joey, is because what did you do with Google?
So I looked at Google Trends, where you can see what's trending more in the news. You can compare different, like you can just type in a search term and you can compare them. So reporting a little bit with Joe and the Dallas Cowboys, and like I said, being super close to this Karen Reed trial, I was just curious at this point in the season for the NFL. And it seems like the Karen Reed stuff is only getting more and more public and well known, and news is heightening around it. How do they compare? And Karen Reed, that news is kind of kicking the crap out of the Dallas Cowboys right now. I mean, you look at the past 30 days, and it's been majority all Karen Reed compared to Dallas Cowboys. It's just funny.
No, and I think there's two things that one. I think the Cowboys are always a good reference point because the Cowboys are so Googled, so searched. And then the fact that a local Boston trial that I had never even heard of right now has more interest than on a national level than the Cowboys, I think is very interesting. Speaking of the Cowboys, though, we know right now that this is not the most eventful time. It's June 17th. Joey, we are still more than a month away from the start of training camp. That's the next time they practice. So this is what we call a dead period in the NFL by a long shot. We guessed that maybe the Cowboys would have some post June 1st signings, and they still could because they have some roster spots open. I believe 4. I'd been pitching the idea of Calais Campbell. He recently signed with Miami, I believe. So he's gone off the board, but I think the Cowboys' defensive line's a little thin, so they could definitely add there eventually. But right now, they haven't had any signings post June 1st. It's been very, very quiet. But we did have something last week that was very, very interesting that I wanted to talk about a lot today. And that was the extension for one Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. And Trevor Lawrence signed a 5-year, $275 million extension with $200 million in practical guarantees, according to Spot Track. Very, very high, right? And I think the most interesting part of the deal from a conversational standpoint is the fact that Trevor Lawrence signed for $55 million per year. That's the average. That's what the APY is. Tied with Joe Burrow for the highest in the league. So, Joey, my first thought seeing that deal, and some other people have pushed back on this, saying that, I don't know if it really affected this, but I think at the very least it added some legitimacy, some concreteness, some substantiability to the idea that Dak Prescott is going to get paid $60 million per year on his next deal. One, what did you think of the Lawrence deal? What do you think of the idea that Dak is going to get paid?
The Lawrence deal, I mean, at first I was sitting on a porch, just hanging out on a good old Thursday evening, and I was just like, oh my God, Trevor Lawrence, like, what, good for you. The thing is, though, I feel like people don't resonate, and it didn't resonate in my head at first either. Is like, this contract isn't going to really kick in until 2 years from now, where the salary cap for teams is just going to be much higher than it is right now. So, like, 55 million looks like a ton right now, but it's not going to look that crazy when the contract actually kicks in. It's still going to be a huge number.
Yeah, and also just to side tangent, we're going to talk more about this, but that's the case with every single quarterback deal. Every single deal pretty much in the NFL. I mean, some deals age worse than others, right? Like, I don't think the Deshaun Watson deal is ever going to age well. But go look, and we'll go through it a little bit later. There are some guys that, like, were the highest paid quarterback in the league, and 3 years later, we're like, wow, what a cheap deal.
And I do that off of that. You talk about the Deshaun Watson deal. I think there's definitely a reason to talk about the Deshaun Watson deal and this Dak Prescott thing if he doesn't extend with the Cowboys and kind of goes into this free agency bidding war, because like Kirk Cousins was sort of that this year, but I just feel like the bidding war for Deshaun Watson, what was that, 2022, I think it was just absurd. And he got his full $230 million guaranteed because of it. I think if Dak has another one of those years like he did this past season, that could very well be a thing. And I know, like the second part of the question that you asked me, the number seems to be going around, like you said, is 60 million. I think there's a Yahoo article that talked to some like executives and whatever other people that said like 60 million seems like the number now. I did a little number crunching, and I'm not going to say it's kind of like dumb number crunching. Like, I'm not some salary cap aficionado, but I just looked back on the past couple of years on the highest average per year quarterback that signed that offseason or whatever, compared to that year's salary cap. Because obviously we don't know, like we were just saying, we don't know what the salary cap is going to be 3 years from now. So I just compared it to the salary cap of the year that they signed the extension.
One thing we can guarantee, though, is that it's going to go higher.
Yes,
it's going up. So,
so I went back 4 or 5 years. I didn't include the pandemic 2021 year when the cap went down, because that was just whatever. So Mahomes in 2020 signed that massive 10-year $450 deal. When the salary cap was 198 million, that was 22.7% of team salary cap. Aaron Rodgers signs the big deal where he's making 50 million a year in 2022. The cap that year is 208 million. That's 24%. Then you got Burrow last year, who now makes 55 million. That's 24.5%. And then you got T-Law and Joe Burrow this year, but kind of just Trevor Lawrence because he was the one that signed it this year, where it would now be 21.5%. So, and another thing I want to say about this, and I'm going long on you here, but one thing I want to say, Trevor Lawrence is clearly not in that same tier, that same level as a Joe Burrow, as a Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. He's just not in that tier. And I think that's the reason why we didn't see him get any more than Joe Burrow. I feel like if there was even some sort of case that he could be even comparable to Joe Burrow, he would have gotten more, but he didn't. So I just think there was a weird year where that's kind of a reason why no quarterback really set the market in terms of contracts this offseason. But Dak, especially if he has another good year like next year. And I mean, even if he doesn't have that same, like doesn't come in second place for MVP voting or whatever it was, or third, I forget what it was, but he's still going to be highly regarded, and probably set the market like he did the first time he signed the contract extension. Um, so let's say hypothetically the salary cap in 2025 it's 255 million right now. Let's say it's like 270, 271.
That's exactly. It's funny because when you had this, I have it a segue from this, but the number I had was 270. Just funny that's the exact same number I had too.
So I actually I did a quick calculation, but 271 and then like divided or 24% of 271.
And I also did 24%. That's funny. I did 24% of 270. And so you got 64, but you did 271, right?
Yeah. So that was basically 65 million.
Yeah.
He could be a 65 million a year guy.
To your point, I think let's run this out. Okay, so $270 million next year, right? Which means that's the number that teams have going into the offseason. So hypothetically, let's say Dak Prescott does not sign an extension this year. Does not. He does not come to the table, which I think people got to remember. And Andrew Brandt tweeted this too, and I completely agree. Dak Prescott has the most leverage of any player in the NFL right now, this moment, right? And of course, there's the situation where, hey, maybe next year he comes out and doesn't replicate this past season, right? Maybe the interceptions go back up, proving that, maybe 2 years ago wasn't an anomaly. It was something that he could potentially do. Maybe, hypothetically, right? But he's a gambling man, as he said, and he has no problem gambling on himself. And I'm telling you right now, Joey, just hearing him talk in minicamp, the dude is confident about his second year with McCarthy's system, his second year throwing, to Brandon Cooks and CeeDee Lamb and that combination. Jake Ferguson taking another step. I think the offensive line is a little bit of a bigger question mark, right? So is the running game. But Dak Prescott feels very confident about his ability to replicate or at least come close to what he did last season, where he was the runner-up MVP. So all that being said, he does not have to come to the table. He does not have to sign an extension. It's a mutual thing. He has a no trade clause. He has a no tag clause. He could hit free agency if he wanted to. So if it's $270 million on the cap and he comes close to replicating or replicates what he did this past year, it's not in my opinion, it's not even a question that he's getting $65 million per year on the open market next year.
It's just so crazy to think that 65 is going to be the number for Dak Prescott. But everyone's saying 60. I really think 65 which would be, I mean, if we're doing 5 years, that's 5 years, 325 million.
Yeah.
And with all this leverage that I know you talked about in your reporting and everyone's been talking about with that Dak has because of the clauses and everything like that. What about the guarantees? I mean, I think Joe Burrow's guarantees right now, he has more than anyone and it's like 220. Dak's probably going to think
Deshaun's 230 is still the
oh, yeah. That would make sense.
Which again, to my point earlier, wild that they gave him 230 guaranteed after he had not played for 2 years?
Yeah. And another thing with Dak, and I know he's saying he's a gambling man, but like we've already seen like no quarterback, I shouldn't say no quarterback, but not many quarterbacks have gone through a worse situation in their contract year where Dak had one of the worst injuries that you've seen a quarterback suffer just with everything around that. And they still paid him market-setting money that next offseason.
He said, yeah, to your point, he was the highest paid QB in the league when that happened. And to be fair, one thing about that injury, though, if you look at the 5 games he had before the injury, he was on an MVP track. He was playing out of his mind.
Yeah, he was throwing 7,000 passing yards a game.
Didn't he have Didn't he have like 700 yards and like 5 touchdowns in a game? It was something insane, or 650 or something. Yeah,
it was absurd.
So one thing to add to the leverage of Dak Prescott, and again, one thing I want to make clear: we give the Cowboys, and I'm gonna criticize them a little bit later, right? But we give the Cowboys, for a lack of a better word, a lot of shit about how they handle contracts, right? Obviously, we're seeing it with CeeDee Lamb, we're seeing it with Dak Prescott. We're seeing it potentially with Micah Parsons, who I highly doubt at this point. Just in my opinion, that's not reporting. It just feels like they're not going to do an extension this offseason. They'd probably just kick the can down the road. But at the end of the day, it does take 2 to tango. And one thing Dak Prescott does not have to do And he could. One thing we talk about with Dak is how much money he's going to get, right? Well, he doesn't have to, hypothetically, right? Maybe he does say, you know what, I'll take 50 million per, and let's go win a Super Bowl next year, right? Or let's set up for the future, or whatever. But if he wants to take as much as he can, he does not have to do a solid to the Cowboys. Because to be blunt, the Cowboys played hardball with him for a while. They were all business with him through the previous contract history. So let's do a quick rundown really quick, right? Dak Prescott signs his rookie deal in 2016 after being a 135th overall pick, fourth round pick, right? That was a 4-year deal, Joey, for $2.72 million. Cheap, right? Consider the timing back then too. Very cheap, right? So Joey, what does he go out and do in his rookie season, right? He goes out and wins off. He starts 16 games, wins Offensive Rookie of the Year, is sixth place in MVP voting. Looks fantastic. What does he do from there moving forward through the 4 years of his deal? Proceeds to be a darn good starting quarterback in the NFL, right? Just, enough to get paid. 2019 rolls around. They say, no, we're gonna play hardball with you, to a point where they franchise tag. Okay, $22 million, I believe that franchise tag ended up being. No, 1 year deal worth $31.4 million. Okay. At the time, by the way, the highest paid QB was Russell Wilson getting $35 million per. So then 2021 comes around, and we mentioned it. 5 games, looks like MVP front runner maybe at the time. Like, he was incredible. And then he has a compound fracture, which, Joey, that was my biggest fear playing football, was specifically a compound fracture. Do you know about those?
It's just when both of your like major bones in your leg break, right?
No. So compound fracture is when a broken bone breaks through the skin. Like, it is
Oh, okay.
like it is so jarring that it's and so traumatic that it's
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was bad. Yeah. Thank goodness he had a sock on because oh my goodness.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. Anyways, so but eventually, even with that, they play hardball again in negotiations, and eventually they pay him they make him the highest paid QB in the league, 4 years, 160 mil. That brings us to where we are today. And if I'm Dak Prescott, there's 2 takeaways I have from the previous negotiations with the Cowboys. One, it's business, right? They're not gonna just concede until there's a deadline, and then they're going to get pushed to their absolute limit, and then you can take what you can from them. If you're Dak Prescott, you can get that no tag clause, you can get that no trade clause, you can still become the highest paid QB in the league on a deal that really isn't fake. Some of these deals end up being kind of fake in terms of practical guarantees and all that. No, you can get what you want. So why not push them to the limit again, not even come to the table? Which, one thing I've noticed between the two conversations, or two sides of the conversation, Cowboys, Stephen Jones, Jerry Jones, we want Dak Prescott to be a Cowboy for life. There's a difference between not negotiating and talking and knowing what the number is. Meanwhile, Dak's like, no, we haven't negotiated. we haven't. No, we're not. We haven't negotiated yet. I know I'm not even going to focus on negotiations. I'm going to let my agent take care of it. But guess what? I know I deserve to be the highest paid QB in the NFL when it comes time for that to happen. Pretty different tones. Similar message, different tone. So my point on that, Joey, Dak Prescott very well could go into free agency next year if he wants to. He doesn't have to come to the table. And if he does, we're talking $65 million per on a 5-year deal, potentially 4 or 5-year deal. Or Joey, do we even talk $70 million on a 3-year deal?
Yeah. I mean, less years that I could definitely see that happening. I have 2 questions for you though. I'll start with the first one, which is what would Dak Prescott have to do in 2024 to make his contract value worsen? It would be a lot, right? Like it would have to be something crazy to happen for his contract value to be worse.
I think for me, it's the interceptions go up again. Because if you look at his career, 2 seasons ago when he led the NFL in interceptions, it's an anomaly. It's not it's the number that's not compared to the other ones, right? I forgot the exact math term for it. That's not who he is, right? But what if he had another season like that, and then 2 of the last 3 years, hypothetically, he led the NFL in interceptions? Then you start saying, "Uh-oh, I don't know." But even so, Joey, I don't know if that kills his market if he hits the open market.
He would have to play like just really bad where it's not like, oh, it wasn't a one game thing, it wasn't a one off, it wasn't this like injury he was dealing with. It was just really bad for a long, long stretch of games. I think if that happens, then I could see it. But I just don't think that happens as long as he has Mike McCarthy in year two, where they just seemed like they were so dialed in together last year. The offense is not at a point where it seems like there would be any sort of hiccups or reasons for it to go back down. I guess you could say the offensive line with the left tackle, new center. But even that, like, as long as Guyton is serviceable, it should be fine, which would not make Dak's contract value any worse. The second question, if the Cowboys lose Dak through this bidding war, what do? They are like they would have to try to sign a veteran. I mean, unless they really think Trey Lance can come through, because like you said with the whole Trey Lance thing and how I know you think he's the most interesting.
I'm doing that because you're bringing me to my next point. Can I go back really quickly? One thing,
please do.
To the first question, I don't know even if a torn ACL, knock on wood, because you never wish anything bad. I don't even know if a torn ACL would kill his market.
I don't think so. I mean, the compound fracture didn't.
Maybe like if all of a sudden some throwing injury, like hey, his elbow, it's kind of kind of similar concerns that Matthew Stafford had a little bit. Where, to be honest with you, it hasn't really shown yet. But now, the murmurs of like, hey, maybe his career is not going to last as long as people thought. Maybe something like that, maybe. But even then, it's like, all right, then how about 2 years, $70 million each, and then with an option for a third, and then we move on from there. Because guess what, Joey? And this brings me to my second point. There's going to be QB needy teams next year. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of QBs on the market. I think the market is primed to be dominated by Dak Prescott if he entered free agency next season. Let me give you a rundown of some free agents next year, Joey. Jordan Love, who, let's be honest, they're going to sign. The Packers are going to sign him. So off the market, right? Tua Tagovailoa, who, let's be honest, well, actually, to be honest with you, that could get a little interesting. Are you going to pay Tua $55 million per? Because that seems like where he'll be after the Trevor Lawrence deal, right? So we'll see if Miami does that. Maybe we can bring on Mara to talk about that. Sam Darnold, who we'll see if he even's the starter in Minnesota. Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Jacoby Brissett, Taylor Heineke, Marcus Mariota, Jarrett Stidham, Drew Lock, Andy Dalton, Justin Fields, Joe Flacco, Mike White, Jameis Winston, Mac Jones, Carson Wentz, Jimmy Garoppolo, Casey Keenum, Mason Rudolph, Easton Stick, Cooper Rush, Josh Dobbs, CJ Beathard, Brandon Allen, Nick Mullins, Kyle Trask, Josh Johnson. Are you getting the picture, Joey?
Yeah, I think Marcus Mariota deserves to set the market at $75 million a year. Oregon ties.
Hey, Marcus got. It's another story. Anyways, did you see the stat? Someone compared Marcus's stats in his first 4 seasons to Trevor Lawrence, and like Marcus's were better.
Really? Oh gosh.
Yeah. Just FYI. Anyways, my point being, there's going to be QB needy teams. Oh, and let's talk about the draft for a second, right? And obviously, there's still some things to be figured out, right? But we're talking Shadur Sanders, Riley Leonard,
Carson
Beck, Dylan Gabriel, maybe Preston Stone here in Dallas. Who's the guy? I'm just forgetting his name.
From where?
No, I know. I actually completely went blank. There's another guy I'm thinking of. Oh, from A&M, Connor Wegman. He's another one. So long story short, though, we don't even have at this point, and maybe someone emerges a la Joe Burrow, right? He was not talked about as a guy and then ended up being the number 1 pick and was fantastic. But there's not even a guy that we're really talking about as like, oh, top 5 pick no matter what. There's not the Josh Allen, mysterious guy from Wyoming. What could he be? There's not the Drake May of like, hey, cannon of arm, he'll be a top 5 pick. There's none of that with this class. But there's going to be QB needy teams. Like, do you think the Raiders think that AOC / Gardner Minshew is the future? Right?
Nope.
No. Like, what happens in Seattle if Geno Smith and Sam Howell struggle? Like, I mean, like, anyways, there's going to be QB needy teams. That's the one constant every single year is that there's a handful of teams that need new quarterbacks. And there's going to be that case again next year. Dak Prescott at the age of 31 next season is going to be so sought after, barring absolute destruction.
I think, yeah, us talking about this, I'm starting to think like 60 million probably will not be enough.
It seems like the floor.
It's absolutely the floor. It is.
If he wants to, again, if he wants to sign and he wants to get the most money possible, and why not at this point? I mean,
it sounds like he does, right?
Well, it sounds like he's definitely not willing to be team friendly with this. And, the fact that the fact that we have less than 3 months to the start of the season and they haven't negotiated once. And again, maybe that means they've talked about it. They have an idea, but they haven't just like contract pitched back and forth. The fact that hasn't happened yet, and it could happen in training camp, but I also thought it could happen at the combine. I don't know.
I'm really interested now that we're talking about this, how much the last contract negotiation, just the whole lead up to it, because obviously he got paid and got paid well, but the whole lead up to it, that was a very, very like interesting just back and forth of what was going to happen and all that stuff. I wonder if that like soured Dak and that made him feel less team friendly this time around.
That's what I was insinuating when I'm like, you've seen this before, and you also know that you could get a lot out of it once the deadline hits, right? And sure, deadlines make deals, but do deadlines make good deals for everyone? Not necessarily. There was another point I had too about Dak. Oh, one thing we should talk about, because last time in the negotiations, the big question was, okay, Dak Prescott is coming off a compound fracture ankle. Will he ever be the same, right? So that was a factor worth considering, which, I mean, I remember like I wasn't covering the NFL at the time, but I even remember thinking, and I don't know if this is where you were too, Joey, is there a chance they just let the season ride out? We'll see, and then maybe franchise tag him again or let him go if it's bad? Like maybe he doesn't come back. I remember almost being a little surprised that they did the deal, to be honest, last time.
Me too.
Like slightly.
It really felt like they didn't want to sign him to that kind of money. It didn't seem like that was the sort of faith that they had in him. Obviously, that's how it ended, but it just seemed that there was so much going into like so much drama leading up to that where it was like, do they really want this guy as their franchise QB?
Yeah. I don't know. And the one factor, so last time the concern was the health, right? And justifiably so from a Cowboys perspective. And a lot of fans will tell you, and I understand this, right? If your ultimate goal is to win a Super Bowl, that's, playoff success should be a major factor in determining whether or not this quarterback is the one you want to, one, pay, and for two, to be your quarterback for the intermediate future. Dak Prescott hasn't done well in the postseason. That is a fact, right? But one thing I'll tell you, neither has Lamar Jackson. And guess what Lamar Jackson did? He signed his own deal to be the highest paid QB in the NFL when it happened. So Dak Prescott 2-5 in the postseason. The one Cowboys thing, because we're talking about Dak Prescott as leverage, the one Cowboys thing, like from their perspective, you could kind of rationalize, I guess, as a reason that they might just want to see this out is, yeah, hey, we're tired of a 2-5 quarterback in the postseason. We're tired of what last year was. We hated what we saw again in it hurt, right? There's a reason why every single head coach or every single coach on the roster is on a 1-year deal, and so is the quarterback. We want to see make or break no matter what. We want to see, and then we believe that we can give you a dollar amount in the offseason that's beyond market value that'll make you stay if it's worth it, or we'll let you walk. That I don't buy that as legit. I don't buy that as much, that idea, but based on circumstance, it's possible, I guess.
It is. How committed do you think? It seems like Dak is never like he wants to be like in a perfect world, the Cowboys would pay him and he would be a Cowboy for life, right? Like that'd be Dak's perfect world.
Yeah, I believe so.
So, oh my goodness, I can't imagine him in another uniform. Like 'cause Kirk Cousins is gonna.
I can.
Oh my goodness.
Like, I mean, in terms of pure imagine, I mean, the one I keep thinking of is Vegas, to be honest.
Hmm. Pittsburgh came to mind for me if Fields and Wilson don't work out. They just have such a good team other than the quarterback where
Yeah.
he could just slide in and they'd be a Super Bowl contender basically right off the bat.
And Mike Tomlin just signed an extension.
Hmm.
And I hate the one thing I hate doing, and we haven't done it yet. Maybe we will. is where could Dak Prescott go? And I think I don't want to do it yet because I don't think it's legitimate yet.
Yeah.
Right. But where could he possibly go in 2024 or 2025? I mean, you start looking at it, and there are teams that fit this, right? Pittsburgh, the Raiders. I mentioned Seattle as like a kind of wild card, right? I mean, what if no, I'm not even gonna go there. Never mind. But the thing is, there's also open QB openings that you never anticipate that happen. Who thought that Justin Fields and Russell Wilson would both be on the Steelers?
Yeah, there wasn't many bingo cards that had that one. That's for sure.
Who thought Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix would both be in Atlanta?
Yeah, they signed Dak to a deal and then draft a rookie in the first round. 70 Dak gets a 5-year, 70 per year deal, and then they just bring in a rookie in the first round. That'd be fun. But if he goes into free agency and this really does become like a true bidding war, the numbers that I imagine it'll be what he'll be 31 next year. The numbers are just going to be insane. Year, full number, and guarantee are just going to be, I think, stuff we've never seen before. Because like all these things we've said, he's a very good quarterback. He's going to be in insanely high demand, and there's just not a better option out there. And if a team has money and they just kind of want that quarterback to kind of get over the hump, or even if it's they want a quarterback to put them in irrelevancy because they just have had struggles at that position for so long. I just think there's so many things going for Dak Prescott right now that shows he'll be making 65, maybe even $70 million a year.
It's funny how you start looking at this and it's like, man, the Chiefs were smart to get Mahomes locked up to 10 years when they did.
Everyone at the time was like, because that was 2019, and everyone was like, this is crazy, 450 million right after the Super Bowl. But you look at it and you're like, no, that's actually kind of smart in terms of how much of a bargain he's going to be at the end. Now, granted, Mahomes and his agent aren't going to just let that happen. Like, they've already restructured, and they'll probably continue restructuring so long as he keeps doing this stuff that he's doing. But yeah, I think the longer the years, and it just doesn't resonate in our brains because we see it as like, oh my gosh, he's going to be making 55, 60, 65 million this year. We're like, that's not going to be happening for another 2 years, basically.
Yeah. So one thing you mentioned, you asked this earlier and we didn't actually answer it. I just realized. What do the Cowboys do if Dak Prescott does hit free agency and says, deuces, I'm out in 2025? My gut reaction is they sign Cooper Rush and or Trey Lance to compete for the starting job, and then and or draft a QB in the first round. But in order to draft a QB in the first round, then things would probably have to go not as well, or maybe they did, and Dak's like, I'm out. Then you gotta trade up into the top 5 and give up next year's first round pick too, and the second round pick, and next year's first round pick after that, 3 first round picks to jump all the way up into the top 5 to go get Shadur Sanders, to compete with Trey Lance and Cooper Rush. I don't even know if that sounds right. I think maybe then they would just have Cooper Rush, Trey Lance compete, maybe sign like a Mike White or something to be the third, and then just, see what happens for a year. Because at the end of the day, they're still paying $40 million no matter what on their QB room next season, even though no QB is under contract right now. Because that's Dak Prescott's cap hit already. So they're not paying it. That's the cap hit.
Do you know what happens to his cap hit if he signs a new deal? Does the cap hit just combine with the 40 million, or does it get mixed up somehow? I just don't know how the cap hit numbers work.
That's a good question. I can ask around about that. That's a good question. Maybe we'll revisit that on the next pod, because I would guess that you could manipulate it if you have new fodder into it.
I mean, they'd have to, because hypothetically, say he's making $65 million a year plus the 40 million.
Yeah, then that's untenable.
$100 million. That's what, 40% of your cap going into one guy?
Or you do like you push it off even further. Next thing you know, you're paying Dak Prescott on a cap hit level. You have a cap hit from Dak Prescott till what, 2035? Like you're pushing off again, and it's just it's following you forever. So we'll see. I think it's interesting. Joey, my big 3 questions moving forward about Dak Prescott, and this is what I want fans and listeners to think about themselves. One, and this is in my opinion the least important question because I think the answer is pretty obvious. Do the Cowboys want Dak Prescott as their quarterback of the future? I think yes, because the alternative seems wild, scary. Remember, we're talking about a position where the Cleveland Browns were so desperate for one that they gave $230 million guaranteed to a guy who hadn't played in a long time and had a laundry list of off the field issues. 2, does Dak Prescott want to sign with the Dallas Cowboys? Or / does he want to see the highest potential payday for his market? Does he want to see his market all the way through? And then my third question, would Dak Prescott, despite all this, take a relatively team-friendly deal and get paid? So like I'm talking like, would he take a $55 million per right now? Which I think would be team-friendly at this point. Those are the 3 questions that I'm thinking about moving forward. Would Dak Prescott take a team-friendly deal? Does he even want to re-sign in Dallas, or does he want to see his market all the way through? And do the Cowboys want him to be the QB of the future? That's what I kind of want people to think about.
And I think those comments that he made earlier, just like, I don't play for money. I never play for money. I'd give it up if it meant playing this game. I think those were taken out of context.
100%. 100%.
He was saying that because he loves football, obviously, but that doesn't mean he wants what he deserves and he knows he can get. And especially with a team that hasn't been awesome to him in the last time, like we just talked about.
Out later in that interview, he said that I know what my worth is. And I'm going to let my people take care of it because the question was about how do you focus on football right now while you have a lot of off the field contract stuff going on.
I mean, honestly, with him, I feel like it's almost the opposite. Like he should know, like I am going to get paid regardless. There is not a single sweat for me right now. Like I am going to get a bag. Cowboys or not, someone's paying me, so I'm fine.
Dude, it's easiest to have a poker face to be a gambling man when you know you're going to get paid.
Yeah.
If the thing is rigged, there's no reason to sweat.
No, and it's an interesting gamble that the Cowboys are taking, but at the same time, and I know you've talked about this, what would the Cowboys have to do to get Dak to come to the negotiation table early? Why would he ever want to do that? Why would that ever make sense? Because
but what they could have done earlier, Joey, is like hypothetically, instead of doing the whole franchise tag dance the first time around, right? Give him a 4-year deal in 2019. Okay, You've played well. Give him the 4-year deal, 4 years, and this is the important part too. At the time, 4 years, $120 million. So that's $30 million guaranteed. So with the market, but the market's rising, and that deal looks amazing 3 years later, right? Then if you do that deal in 2019, then Dak Prescott would have been a free agent this year, right? And say, you know what though, after the 2021 season, the way you played, or after 2022, maybe Dak Prescott goes, hey, I just led the league in interceptions. I don't know. Maybe the Cowboys go, you know what? We're going to give you a market deal right now, right? We still believe in you. Here's another 4 years, $45 million per year deal, right? You get security. You get locked. You're good. We're good. We'll guarantee a lot of it. We have the flexibility to get out in 2027 or 2026. We have an out, right? So hypothetically, or 2025 in that case. You know what I mean? Like if they moved up the timeline earlier and didn't play hardball from the beginning and then do what they've done, I think that there would have been a chance to not only pay Dak Prescott less money, but one, endear yourself to him in terms of a negotiation standpoint. Maybe not. Maybe that's a little naive. But also, who knows?
Yeah. And I think it's a little unfair with the hindsight stuff because, I mean, back in 2019, 2020, he was a very good quarterback. Like, do not get me wrong about that. But the season that he just had, like, second in MVP voting, a favorite at one point, I'm pretty sure, to win MVP. Like he looked this was clearly the best year he's had in the NFL. And now I feel like there's just like all those questions that were before. People are still going to ask him because people are always going to ask them because he plays for the Cowboys and his playoff record. But I I personally don't think that Packers game was entirely his fault. I mean, the
No.
Green Bay scored 40 points in 3 quarters or 48, whatever it was.
Joey, I go back to the point that Jordan Love said on Micah Parsons' podcast. So to his face, saying that we knew you guys didn't play linebackers, so we could just run it up you and then play action off of it. Just saying that to his face, like, and obviously Micah didn't take it personally because guess what? One, they were in dime and nickel the entire game because they had one true linebacker on the roster, and two, Micah's obviously was pass rushing / interior pass rushing.
Well, that's exactly. So that's my point of just like Dak. We could do a whole rankings thing if we wanted, but he, I think, has proven himself as a quarterback that can lead a team to a Super Bowl. Obviously, he's not a Patrick Mahomes. He's not that level of star because no one is. It's just Patrick Mahomes basically, but I don't think he's that much further behind any of the other guys. Maybe he's not a Joe Burrow or Josh Allen, sure, but I don't think he's like light years away from them too either.
The problem with playoff success being an indicator for what should you get paid / can you win a Super Bowl is that Brock Purdy went to the Super Bowl last year, right? He led his team to a Super Bowl. Is he better than Dak Prescott? Well, if he led him to the Super Bowl, he must be a better quarterback, right? Jalen Hurts did it. He must be a better quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, Rex Grossman did it in 2005 or whatever the hell it was. He must be a better quarterback than Dak Prescott. Obviously, I'm being a little bit, facetious here, right? I'm kind of joking. But the point is, like, that's the tough thing with playoff success. Lamar Jackson is a 2-time MVP, has not been to a Super Bowl, has not played well in the playoffs. It's just fact. Similar, numbers-wise, similar to Dak Prescott, like, has not played well in the postseason, right? So it's hard to use that, in my opinion, as an indicator of whether or not you're going to win a Super Bowl or not. And you can, obviously there's caveats to it. Like, hey, the Cowboys have an incredible roster. They should be able to do this. Well, that incredible roster didn't show up to the Packers game last season. So.
Can I give you another sort of situational? Yeah. What if we talk about what if Dak has a really bad year? What would that do for his contract? What if it's the other way around? What if Dak wins MVP this year? The Cowboys, let's not get crazy. Let's not get crazy and say they'll make the Super Bowl. But let's say they go back to the NFC Championship for the first time in 28 years or whatever it is. And he plays awesome. And this team is one of the best teams in the NFC the entire season long. What does that do for his contract outlook?
Part of me, just gut reaction. Maybe that's the best thing for both sides because he's going to get paid. And then maybe he's like, dude, we are close. Like, CD just got paid. We're going to pay Micah. We are close, and maybe he's like, all right, I love it here anyways. I live and prosper. Everything's great, blah, 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 blah. Like, I got a home. I'm setting up a family. I just had a kid. I'm just going to stay here. Maybe. I don't know. That'd be kind of my gut reaction. Actually, maybe that might be the best thing for both parties.
You saying CD and Micah, so they're going to probably be paying them $140 million on average, which again, like we've talked about, seems crazy, and it kind of is crazy, even though it won't be as nuts when the salary cap in 3-4 years is probably $300 million.
How much is Nick Bosa getting paid?
35 or 35, 34, somewhere around there. Mike,
so hypothetically, let's at its peak. This is the peak. They could be paying $70 million for Dak, and this is just per year APY. So the structure is not relevant here, or not relevant here. $70 million APY for Dak, 32 for CD Lamb, and 38 for Micah Parsons based on just inflation. So that's 38, 32. That's 140. Yeah, 140. Wow.
And honestly, I don't even think that's the ceiling. I think the 70 for Dak is the ceiling, but I think Micah could probably. What if he's a DPOY? He's the favorite to win DPOY right now. He could be a $40 million a year. He could be the first $40 million a year non-quarterback.
And we don't even know the ceiling for CeeDee Lamb. We don't. We don't know the floor for CeeDee Lamb either. We don't know when CeeDee Lamb's going to get paid. We don't know when Brandon Ayuk's going to get paid.
These three players are Excellent. Clearly, like top of their positions, all three of them. And I guess CD and Micah more like top of their position, but Dak is a very, very good quarterback, which is obviously the most valuable position in sports. This, and I mean, I would love to. I don't know the history behind this, but a team that has three top of the market guys and how that's worked. I mean, the Chiefs sort of did with Mahomes, Kelsey, and Chris Jones, I suppose, but there's a reason they had to trade away Tyreek Hill.
I was going to say, I mean, at the end of the day, we talk about the salary cap being kind of sometimes it's so malleable that if you have the right people in charge, you can manipulate it. But when you draft as well as the Cowboys have, sometimes you got to get rid of guys. I mean, obviously not willing to go there yet by any means, but me personally, like, I wouldn't think it's the craziest thing ever if you had a really good offer and you considered moving on off one of them. The Niners are going to trade either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk next season. They can't keep them both. They said they chose CMC is who they chose. They're like, all right, CMC, we can't keep all of them. So one of them is going.
I think that's also why they drafted Pearsall, which just kind of leaves the contingency plan. But and obviously they wouldn't trade Dak away because first off, he has the clause. Second off, he's the quarterback. Third off, they might not be able to get anything for him if he just leaves in free agency. So it would clearly be CD or Micah. And I think that those trade hauls would be like historic for non-quarterback deals.
I feel like Micah Parsons would garner 2 first-round picks and 2 twos.
Yeah, there's not a
my gut
not a good player in there.
Yeah, that's my gut guess. You think DC's not? you don't think Dan Quinn want him back?
I know. Honestly, that'd be because Mike had that one little comment of just being like, "I want to like I who knows? Maybe I'll follow him wherever he goes." Obviously, being sarcastic, but it's like, hey, they obviously really like working with one another.
He said it sarcastically, but then shoot. No, let's just stop there because then we're
now we're going in the rabbit hole.
No, yeah, there's the whole rabbit hole that is not even that's just imaginary land.
Yeah,
rabbit hole right now. Anyways, Joe, I think that was a good discussion on Dak. Any last thoughts?
No, I'm gonna tune more into this Karen retrial because I am very interested as this thing ramps up and we get closer to a final decision. I don't think we're gonna hear anything new on Dak Prescott in terms of deals actually happening because, again, why would he? It makes no sense for him to want to negotiate right now.
If I'm Dak Prescott, to be honest, I'm seeing this all the way to free agency next year. He's a gambling man. Gamble.
The CD stuff, that'll be fun to watch out for whenever that may happen. Maybe before training camp?
Maybe. I had thought that it could actually happen soon. Because that's the thing with all this, and this will be our last thought because we got to get going. But eventually, shoes got to drop, dude. We've talked about leaves falling. The whole damn tree is falling at this point, and now we're just picking up leaves. Like we're just waiting. We're waiting for it to happen. And like the thing too is like if you're CeeDee Lamb, eventually you want to secure that payday, right? I think it's human reaction or it's human nature. Okay, let this go far. Let my market rise, let my leverage grow, but eventually you gotta do something with it, right? Like, if someone just had millions upon millions of dollars in the bank and never spent it, and it's like, all right, well, I had this idea of a life that was lived in luxury, but I never actually did it. I don't know. You got to tap into it eventually.
You do.
So, all right. Well, that was a great episode. We talked about murder. We talked about trials. We talked about Dak Prescott, who I think we're both walking away from this crazy idea, Joey. He's going to get paid a lot of money if he wants to pursue his market to the fullest extent. We'll see what happens. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Please tune in to Lone Star Live. We've got a lot of good stuff coming and a lot of good stuff on there. Just sign up for our subtext. I'll remind you again one more time what that sign up is. Text Cowboys to 512-846-6377. That's 512-846-6377. I'm heading out to training camp where you can text with me, that entire time. We'll have a lot of content from there. I'm excited to see their practices with the Rams. I'm excited to get out of Texas heat for a little bit, if we're being honest, Joey. Oxnard should be beautiful that time of the year. So, and we'll have some other cool stuff coming, but thank you again. And that was another episode of How About That Podcast.
Thanks for listening to How About That Podcast.